good afternoon. Welcome to the 12th of the 13 webinars that are part of the 2020 EMOS Webinars program. My name is Caterina Giusti. I'm Professor of Statistics at the University of Pisa in Italy, and today I will act as the webinar facilitator. As for the past webinars, I'm happy that we have the opportunity to join all together for the EMOS webinars, which are indeed a powerful tool that we can continue to use also in these, I would say, rather difficult times. So now let me just briefly explain for any newcomers that EMOS stands for the European Master in Official Statistics, a joint project of universities and data producers in the EU member states, EFTA and EU candidate countries. If your university is interested in applying for the EMOS label, please consider that the permanently open call for universities is available on the EMOS dedicated page on the Eurostat website. For staying in contact with the EMOS news and community, please follow the EMOS on Twitter. The EMOS account is @EU_EMOS. Now, before I give the floor to our speaker, let me first briefly explain how we run the webinar today. As a participant, you can watch and listen to the session. To interact with the presenter, you can use the chat represented by the comic symbol. We encourage you to prepare your questions and pose them during the presentation or during the question break or the final discussion. Should you have any technical problem, please try restarting the Skype for Business or the computer or device that you are using. For more specific technical questions, you can use the chat. In any case, please consider that the slides of the presentation are already available on the EMOS 2020 events website, and the link has been already also indicated in the chat. So today, I have the great pleasure to host Tim Allen from Eurostat. Tim has been working at Eurostat for what can be statistically classified as a significantly long time. For 16 years, he worked in the Eurostat press office, firstly as a press officer and then as the head of press office. For the last 2 years, he has been the deputy head of the dissemination and user relations unit at Eurostat, where he not only continues to keep an eye on the press office, but also coordinates all dissemination products, including publication and website content. As a communicator, his role model is Malcolm Tucker. So today, Tim will be present about recent developments in publishing statistics. So Tim, the floor now is yours until the question break.
Okay, thank you. I hope you can all hear me okay. So let's start. So let's see if I can get to the next slide. Yes. Okay, so Eurostat's mission statement is we provide high quality statistics for Europe. But, and the reason for today's seminar is that that's not enough anymore, because we're living in a world with a deluge of easily and readily available data. And we need our statistics to be visible and attractive. Not just, we can't just produce and hope that people will come and find them. And in fact, dissemination is sufficiently important that it's part of the European Statistics Code of Practice. Hopefully many of you will be aware of the Code of Practice, which is a set of principles around the production of European official statistics. And I had a quick look through just the other day, and at least 4 of the principles make specific reference to dissemination issues. Professional independence, where it says that the head of the office is responsible for decisions on dissemination. Impartiality and objectivity, where the principle sets out the principles, the rules we should follow in our dissemination. Timeliness and punctuality, also affecting the way we disseminate, and accessibility and clarity, which I think are particularly important in the modern world, and perhaps particularly relevant to what I'm going to some of the things I'm going to show you today. Now, dissemination in the statistical office is changing, and it's changing very significantly over recent years. So go back far enough, and what you're talking about in a statistical office was publications, great big paper publications that were page after page of tables of data. And that was the only way that data got out into the world most of the time. Now, for many years now, we've been issuing our data through a website and using a database that is accessible to all, which was a big sea change in the way we disseminate. But more recently, there are other shifts going on, and I'd point to three in particular. So the continuing shift from physical to digital. Physical products are becoming less and less important and less common, and digital products are becoming the main channel for disseminating our data and our analysis. There's also a move away from purely textual to the visual. So the use of much more iconography, the use of colour, the use of graphic design in all our products. And there's also a move away from static towards interactive, not merely displaying a graph or a table, but allowing people to interact with it, to change it, to adapt it. And this has led to where we are today, where some of our main channels for pushing our statistics out, for disseminating them, are via digital publications and visualizations. Now, one thing I want to emphasize, this is a 1 hour, this is scheduled for a 1 hour session. I guess if all goes well, maybe I'll talk for 30 or 40 minutes in total, and you'll ask me questions. So this is not a masterclass in how to disseminate data. This is an overview of where one particular statistical office, Eurostat, is and is going, and some of the products we've created and are using. So it's meant to hopefully to provoke you to think about the way you disseminate data, maybe the way your office does it. Maybe you've got some things that are better than we do. I know that. Looking at the attendance list for this seminar, I'm aware that many of you come from national statistical offices, and frankly, we've stolen ideas from national statistical offices, and equally we've made some of our ideas available to national statistical offices. So I don't claim to be the be-all and end-all, the final word on data dissemination, but I mean, I'm trying to show you some ideas. And if you want to know all about data dissemination, I mean, one place to start, obviously, are the training courses that Eurostat provide. And I had a quick look at the latest European statistical training program, and we had at least 3 different courses in there in this year's training program which are about dissemination of statistics. One is about writing, one is about visualization, and one is about integrating statistics and geospatial information. So, and that's just one example of the courses that are available. So if you're interested in improving your dissemination, in learning more about writing, visualizing and mapping data, there's many courses available. So let's start by thinking about the website, or a website. Now you'll see this is a static picture. Later in the second half, I'll go to the website and tour around a bit and show you some of the things. But you'll immediately see, if you've followed our website over recent years, what you'll have seen is an increasing move towards simplification of the front page and towards the greater use of graphics in our linking around to further information. And this is the database. Again, a traditional tool, a tree structure leading to, I believe it's somewhere approaching 6,000 separate tables of data that are accessible. But even the database, we are working on modernising, and one of the things I may show you live is that we have a new data browser system in development which fully integrates mapping and graphing tools into the data browser, and I'll show you an example of that later. We still produce some traditional publications, though even here they're very much under review. Here's an example of a monthly publication that has perhaps the classic combination of classic graphs, of small tables, of descriptive text, still published every month, and you can find other examples of these on our publications page on our website. But increasingly, what we're producing is digital, what we call digital publications. There's 8 of them so far. They're a mixture of text, dynamic and static visualizations, animations, visuals, and so on. 8, as I say, published so far. We're probably adding new ones at the rate of 2 to 3 a year. And again, I aim to show 1 or 2 of these. But we're also modernising our remaining paper publications. So we are beginning to develop a new series that we call Key Figures On. The first one issued last year and reissued this year in a new edition, Key Figures on Europe. Statistics Illustrated, which mixes together much more visual representation of the data, different forms of graphics. Obviously on the paper one it's static. We're still working on how you make an interactive visualization on paper, but this makes much more use of graphics in its publication, and our aim is eventually to have a range of these covering our key areas of statistics. One interesting point, if I backtrack a couple of slides to where I mentioned the digital publications, you will see over to the left-hand side of the bottom row, there is a digital publication, Key Figures on Europe, as well. So I was talking about modern publications and using more visuals in the publications, also linking a paper publication to an online, a digital publication here, and mentioning Key Figures on Europe. Moving on, even news is changing. We still issue traditional news releases, but alongside traditional news releases, we're also now issuing what we call What's New items, which again make more use of graphics, are shorter, and also have more built-in links and the ability to link in interactive graphics as well. We we make quite a lot of use of static infographics, particularly for social media. I'll show you the social media accounts later, but we do also use static infographics as well, increasingly, as well as interactive visualizations. And we've got a full page of interactive tools on the website, again, which I plan to visit. And as I say, combining maps with the data is becoming increasingly important. We do quite a lot of work in mapping of data, geospatial data and statistics. We're getting towards the end of the presentation bit. I just want to conclude with some thoughts about this. For a traditional publication, possibly all you need is a statistician, or a statistician who's learned how to write, to write a publication, to write an article, to write a piece of content, and to draw a standard statistical graph and add it into the text. But once you start getting more visual, you start talking about visualizations, you're going to need almost certainly to work with a graphic designer. I've seen what happens if a statistician tries to do graphic design. Equally, I've also seen what happens if a graphic designer does statistics. And unless you're incredibly lucky to find somebody who can do both, you're most likely to want to start talking about a team. And then once you start talking about a product like an interactive visualization, you're almost certainly going to want to add an IT expert to your team as well as a statistician and a graphic designer. And then when you start talking about mapping, you may well need a geographical information systems specialist as well. So teamwork becomes increasingly important. And for instance, at the moment, we're working on a new, more highly digital version of our regional yearbook, which has been one of our traditional paper-based publications for many years. And the team that are working on that in total is about 20 people. They're not all working on it full time. I mean, some of them are doing an hour here, an hour there, but we've got a team. We've got communications people, we've got statisticians, we've got graphic designers, we've got IT people, and we've got the GIS people, all involved in this, in designing this publication. Then going increasingly visual and interactive isn't without its problems. I'll just highlight a few, and in no particular order. They're in the order I thought of them and jotted them down. So I've seen criticism sometimes that some of what we're doing is what some people call factoids, rather than analysis. I actually don't necessarily see this as a problem. It's part of different output for different audiences, and some audiences, there's another word for it, infotainment, the combination of information and entertainment. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, but you do need to be aware, and that's part of classic sort of communication dissemination preparation, which is, part one, know your audience, know who you're writing for. Are you delivering factoids or are you delivering analysis? Why are you doing it? Second thing, when you're going increasingly digital and maybe interactive, you've got to think about device responsiveness. It's one thing to look at a visualization on a 27-inch high definition monitor, and another thing to look at it on a 4 or 5-inch smartphone screen. So does your content respond to the device? How do you need to adapt for different size screens? Are you still being statistically accurate? This is particularly relevant when you're working with, say, a graphic designer. Sometimes graphic designers draw things that are nice, but are not necessarily accurate or meaningful. And by that, I mean, what I mean there is we've had examples where the first draft from the graphic designer has been beautifully illustrated, but the illustration has little or no link to the statistic that's being shown. And once you get into visuals, you start getting into the world of political correctness. You know, you do yourself no favors if you color all your men blue and all your women pink, or if in illustrating a group of professions, all your scientists are men and all your nurses and teachers are women. You have to think about what you're depicting and the way it will come across. So you do have to think about this. And once you start using maps more and more, be absolutely certain that you're geographically correct. There are land borders, even within Europe itself, let alone when you go worldwide, that can be controversial. And you need to make sure that what you're representing, I mean, in one way it's easy for, you know, Eurostat doesn't have to make up its own mind on a border or the depiction of a country, because we take that from other people. But you have to make sure that if you're using maps, that your mapping is correct with whatever your government recognizes or doesn't recognize. Equally, once you start mapping, and particularly when you start mapping other areas of the world with which people are not necessarily familiar, and you want to highlight countries, you've got to make sure you highlight the correct country. I say this because I've seen a graphic designer do it. They were meant to highlight 3 African countries which were the major supplier of cocoa beans to the EU, and in one case they, instead of highlighting the correct country, they highlighted the country next door, which is, you know, if you're not familiar with the countries of a continent, maybe it's easy to do, but it's something you need to check. And you've got more problems when you go visual than when you're dealing with a classic graph or table. And finally, at the end of the day, it's all about disseminating statistics. So you have to be careful that you aren't letting the design considerations dominate the statistical considerations. And the final slide, and I'm aware that you've got this. I've been putting links throughout the presentation to interesting things. Here I've summed up some further links that you can follow and look at. Okay, so I'm now going to shrink my presentation and maybe stop sharing the screen for a little while, and then maybe for the moment I can answer a few questions if there are any questions, and then afterwards I can show bits and pieces on the website.
Yeah, Tim, we already received an hint, an idea for discussion. So I didn't read this because I was just calling you when we had the connection problems. So these participants say the visual publications are more analytically adapted, but they are more analyst friendly. But for example, for data reconciliation, numbers plays much more essential role. And for example, statistics used for administrative purposes must be textual. As one scientist said earlier, phenomenon must be described as easy as possible, but not easier. I believe that future of publishing is behind interactivity. Beautiful graphs are impressive, but when clicking one piece of data, you can go further and further. So that's the, I don't know if you want to, I will see, not to reply, but add something.
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes down to one of the key principles of disseminating statistics, but more broadly writing about statistics or writing in any kind of, it's always about know your audience. I have other presentations that I do from time to time and other slides, but I mean, there are things like there's a big thing about know your audience, and also that it's pretty certain that in terms of products there's a rule of no one size, it's not a one size fits all. So you have to adapt your products to your audience and their purposes. So yes, if you're producing statistics to be used in one context, you may well have a higher proportion of text, a higher proportion of classical tables and links to a database. But if you're producing them for use in another context, maybe what you have is simplified text and interactive visualizations. So I think that's what I say there. Yes. I think we've got let's think, what's the date today? It's the 9th. So next week we've got some publications coming out. We're planning our annual release of publications around the Sustainable Development Goals, and there we will have a range of products because there are a range of audiences who want to look at this data. So there will be a detailed publication, a more classical book. I'm not sure how many pages, but you know, maybe a couple of hundred pages. There will be a shorter summary book, still available both in an online version and as a printed version. There will be interactives. There will be the data in the database. But it's, you know, this is an example. This is a set of data that has importance both for policymakers and should interest the public, and because of that it comes out as a range of products, not one product.
Do you think that this can be maybe the future? I mean, to use a mixed strategy of dissemination? It's certainly
in most cases it's our first thought. We tend to think in terms of a package where, I mean, we're not talking about something routine that comes out every so often, but when you're dealing with the very important data sets and the very important releases, yes, you need to, we think in terms of a package. I mean, it's not just, maybe it's a main publication which is available as a PDF and as a paper. Maybe it's, there's an interactive version as well. Maybe there's several visualization tools developed alongside it. There'll be social media content advertising it. There may be a news release. So this happens for most of our major publications now, that we think in terms of a package of different tools aimed at different audiences.
Okay, thank you. So of course, when you, I'm just saying to the audience, if you want to continue to write in the chat, if you have questions or just something that you would like to add. Okay, we have a question right now. Could you please tell us more about the data sources and why can we rely on the statistics are accurate?
Well, very simply, the data source for all our data are the national statistical offices of the EU member states. So we work together in something that technically is called the European Statistical System. And our data is underpinned by legislation. So all major data sets, all Eurostat's major data sets are set out in European legislation, in EU regulations and EU rules. They're implemented by the national statistical offices, and the data is accompanied in all cases by, I'll note this to show you when we look at the database tables, I'll make a note, but all our data is accompanied by metadata and by quality reports, so that you can view how it's collected, the methods it's collected, the way it's collected, and there's often quality reports so that you can see how the quality is assessed. So it's a system founded on law, founded on the expertise of national statistical offices, many national statistical offices have been operating for 100 years or more, collecting data, so that we're dealing with highly skilled system. And then we also have a review system. So we have a review of the entire system through what's called peer reviews, which are periodic, once every 4 or 5 or 6 years, detailed inspections of every statistical office by their peers, by other senior statisticians. And in fact, the review is against the principles of the code of practice that I mentioned. We have an annual review by a body called, there's an annual review body which looks after the quality of the system and makes an annual report to the Parliament and the Council on the quality of the system. So it's a system founded in law and with its carried out by official bodies with official remits and with an underlying quality management system. So that's where the data comes from and why we believe it's highly reliable.
Yeah, thank you.
I mean, if there are no more questions.
No, for the moment, no. So if you want to show us some, we can go on. Maybe if you want to show us some websites, so we try again to share the screen. Let's see.
Yeah. Let's see. And right, it should be there. So here's the website.
It's loading.
So it's
okay.
Yeah. So it's ec.europa.eu/Eurostat is the Eurostat website. So I had a list of things I was going to show you. So data, the database. From there, if you click on that, we get to the database, which looks like this, a classical database tree. We're still, for most of it, we're still using a classic, table, look at a table type of data browser, but we have in development a new browser, which is, it's publicly available on part of our database already in a sort of beta test form. Hopefully within a few months it will become publicly available as a beta test for every table of data in our database. and it combines a classic table view of the data with built-in graphing and mapping. So I mean, I've randomly picked a database that shows something hopefully interesting. This is retail trade, and obviously in the current circumstances, not many of us have been going out regularly to the shops, and you will see that retail trade in the EU and the Euro area has collapsed recently to quite low levels. And you can see that immediately. I mean, you know, those of you who can read numbers at a glance can see it from the numbers, but perhaps it's easier to see it in a line graph. We can also, and we've got a built-in mapping tool for this data set. So that, you know, that this is where we are bringing together interactive visualization and mapping techniques directly into the database, with the view that in the near future this will be going beta for the entire database. There will be a chance to review and comment on it and to contribute to the development, and then eventually this will go live for the entire database. I'll go back to one of the other things I mentioned, where I talked about metadata. This is something that's quite important, and when you navigate through the database tree, you'll see that at points in the tree before you get to a table of data. So I mean, I'm scrolling down to unemployment data, and there is an icon with an M, and that links to the metadata. And here you see, you know, an example of detailed metadata for a data set, leading on to other metadata. I think if I can remember rightly which one I want to show you, one of the interesting things about the metadata, and here harmonized index, that's the inflation rate. And for many data sets, we not only have the sort of overall European metadata, this is an example of the inflation rate, we link to metadata for the individual member states and for other countries. We've even got metadata for the United States here in this data set. So throughout the database, we linked to detailed metadata on data sets. Right, so the next thing I wanted to show, publications. So traditional publications, statistical books, still exist. Here we go. If you look, you'll see that there's fewer published each year. If you look at the ones that are published each year, here's the EU in the world, the one that I mentioned. Here's Eurostatistics, which is the more classic sort of traditional presentation of statistics, but that's because that is designed for a more specialist audience. The EU in the world, which is designed as an overview publication of our data, or key figures on Europe, where if I can find that, there's key figures on Europe, also another overview of our data in different ways. But I mentioned the digital publications, and these are increasingly common. I know it says 19 results. There's actually 8 of them, because we tend to do a new edition each year. And there's two key styles of digital publication at the moment. There's one that perhaps is a little is becoming slightly old-fashioned now, because it's our oldest style of digital publication, which provides a sort of chapter by chapter overview of a subject area. assuming it loads okay. Sometimes these things can be a little slow. So I'll also backtrack as well while that's loading. And the newer type of digital publication, which actually has little or no, here we are. This has little or no text and is actually just a set of visualizations around the data, with a small amount of explanation, and lots and lots of interactive graphics. Let's see the energy. So the energies come up. This takes a more traditional chapter by chapter view. You can look at the publication. It's almost like going from page to page, but then page combines text and graphics. Say, depending on your connection and what you're doing, some of these things are slightly faster than others, so I won't linger on that. You can play with them at your leisure, these digital publications. I mentioned news releases and news items. So news releases, again, are designed at a more traditional audience. They're for the media and economic analysts primarily. So they tend to have a more traditional form, looking very textual, static graphics. As you can see, this is today's. As you can see, GDP in the EU has suffered in the first quarter of the year, but interestingly, and when you look at why it suffered, you can see that household consumption and investment and government consumption, all collapsed. But interestingly, the impact on employment isn't as great yet, and that's largely due to the employment protection schemes that many member states put in place. But alongside those, we've also got a new style of news which is aimed at more a general public, and as I say, is shorter amount of texts, more visual graphics, still linking to the database, linking to other articles and other text elsewhere on the website. Static infographics. So these ones were incredibly successful. We did them over the course of a year. We released them on national days of each member state over the course of a year, and we repeat them for Europe Day. But they're just a simple little infographic with a set of key data for each for the EU and for each member state, and these work very well on social media. I'm just going to say, I'm just wondering if I've got them at home or if I've left them. No, I think they're at work, unfortunately. Did I bring them home? I'm just going to see if I've got them at home. Because otherwise, no, they're still at work. One of the things you can do with these is you can turn them into beer mats. Because they're small, they're square. If you print them the right size, you can turn them into beer mats. And that went very well. We did a set were done for the Western Balkan countries on beer mats and were handed out at a conference. And apparently, they got rid of everything they printed during the first half a day of the conference. So, producing these sort of slightly strange, innovative products can sometimes work as well. Interactive visualizations linked directly from the front page of our website, and there's quite a lot of them. These are the standalone tools. There's also further tools that are built into the digital publications, obviously, and there's other tools that are built into other products and pages on our website. But these are the standalone visualization tools. They range from some quite quite detailed ones, and quite analytical, to as I say, ones that are sometimes accused of being factoids, but are still very popular. And in particular, there's the Regions and Cities Illustrated and the Statistical Atlas, which are things that combine geospatial data and statistics. I mean, Regions and Cities Illustrated is a tool that is directly linked to our database, so it's always fired by the most recent data, combines a map and a graphing tool that you can play with. You can do various things with. You can select various other indicators. We've got, and the Statistics Illustrated tools works at a regional basis. It works on some of our city data. Some of these tools take a few seconds to load as you move around, unfortunately, but you can play with them perhaps at your leisure. There we are. That's a city. We also look at some of the typologies of regions: metropolitan regions, urban, rural, degree of urbanization, border, coastal, island, mountain, and the outermost regions. I'll let you play with that for yourself, but for each of these you can look at mapping, you can have graphic representations, and you can play with the data. And then the Statistical Atlas started just as a product to provide static maps that were linked to the regional yearbook. So all the maps that were shown in the regional yearbook were shown in the Statistical Atlas, and they were run not directly from the database but from downloaded files, so that you always could find the exact map that was shown in the paper publication. But we use it for many purposes now, and one of the most interesting uses of the Statistical Atlas is what we call Lucas, which is one of our single most detailed surveys. It's a land use survey where we sent surveyors out into the field to survey very detailed spots on the map. And I don't know if anybody who's familiar with Luxembourg might recognize that view. That surveyed spot is a well-known museum, which is a kilometre or two away from the Eurostat offices. But that was surveyed as part of the Lucas, and this is a representation of some quite detailed data. Okay, now in my original thing I wrote when I first wrote the description of this course, I mentioned some other things which are quite important. One of them is statistical literacy. Oops, and he says going to the wrong place, so let's go back there. Back to it was on the data tab. No. Oh, it's on the publications tab, I think. Sorry. Is it? Oh no. I'm losing where it's gone. Okay, so I'll find it from the front page. So, statistical literacy, we've created an education corner where we're starting to gather together stuff, and here we're gathering not only our own stuff, but content that comes from other national statistical offices. So we link to our digital publications, visualisations tools. We've even got some games. We've got an e-learning tool developed by Distatis in Germany. We've got a tool developed by the Croatian Statistical Office. We've got some other stuff. We've even got a link to the EMOS program here. and we've got a link to a section on our website where we are writing a series of articles where we're trying to provide an overview of our statistics. The target audience for this was school students aged about 14 to 18 with an interest in the concepts. So statistical literacy is something that's becoming quite important and quite important to consider. And then other things I mentioned, social media. So we're on Twitter, EU_Eurostat. And you'll see Twitter we use very much as an announcement medium. So everything we publish, every new news item and news release, every new publication, we launch on Twitter with a tweet and a graphic. We're on Facebook. We're Eurostat statistics on Facebook. There, our posting on Facebook is less. We post less often, and we concentrate on the things that we think are more interesting to people. The rule of thumb is content I'd like to share with my friends and family. One of the interesting things about social media, obviously, is engagement, and you will see here that, you know, a graphic, this is about average working life. So it generates comment from people, which we can read. And people can ask questions. Here's somebody asking, is the average weighted by the populations? And we answer. So it's one of the things you get with social media is an immediate interaction with an audience, and you can find out what content works and what doesn't work, what people understand, what they don't understand. As well as Twitter and Facebook, we've just started on Instagram as well. We're also EU_Eurostat on Instagram. We've been on there for a couple of weeks now, when we're still figuring out how to use Instagram and what we're going to put up on it. But we'll be there from now on. And the final thing that I mentioned originally was audio-visual content. And we do have audio-visual content. This is our YouTube channel. But if you can see it, can you see the number of views? This is the big problem for us. You know, I can't remember. I skimmed through it. I mean, I found some stuff with 7,000 views, but a lot of our stuff has a few hundred or even less views. So that's one of the big problems for us with audio-visual content, with videos, is we haven't yet found the channel to promote it and distribute it. I know there are some statistical offices that are a little more successful than we are, but given how much audio-visual content can cost to generate, we're still a little bit dubious about it. So I've switched off the screen sharing now. That was a quick overview of some of the things I've talked about on the website. So again, if there's any questions or anything, I mean, if somebody has something that they really want to know where to find it, I can go back and show you. But
yeah, we had a couple of observations that we can read. So can I, Timo, or would you like to show something else before?
No, please go.
Okay. So sometimes it seems that tendency is to refer to dissemination to the society as a whole. How do you think, what is more important, or to what more resources in terms of work of statisticians, IT resources, money should be devoted to the dissemination to the society, or for compiling statistics for administrative purposes for the scientists, government officials, etc.? And yeah, we had another observation, so joining the previous question, how to increase statistical literacy of the different audiences, scientists, government officials, citizens, to improve interaction with Eurostat in these times of disintermediation?
Right. Priority in dissemination. It's a tricky one. I mean, obviously, I guess most statistical offices, you'll hear people talk about key user groups, and your national or European or your administration are obviously often regarded as a key user group. On the other hand, society at large, the public, pay for us through taxation, and they have as much of a right to what we put out as anybody else does. And a third observation is that we, a few years ago, when we studied our users, we did a detailed user study, and the conclusions of that study, I don't think they'd be surprising to anybody who's studied users, whether it's for statistics or anything else. The key finding was that the most important differentiation between users was their level of skill, their level of literacy in statistics, in using computers, in navigating our website. That was more important than what type of user they were. So in fact, underlying our dissemination now, we have developed a set of personas. So these are archetypical users, and what you think about is how a product, how it relates to these types of users, ranging from technically advanced to less advanced users, and you know, you make good products for the general public. You're also serving your administrative users at the end of the day. Often they use the products for the general public just as much as anybody else. And increasing statistical literacy of different audiences. I mean, we try to talk, the same thing. We've had a study going the last few years in which we've been out and been talking to different key audiences. In terms of statistical literacy, we talk to teachers. We talked to university level researchers, we talked to journalists, and specifically to data journalists. We talked to government officials, we talked to administrators in the broadest term all the time. We talk to the public as well, because we do user testing of new products. So we go out, we're actually, hang on, is it here? Your opinion wanted. So yeah, I'm just going to quickly share the screen again and show you something. Okay. So it's coming up again. Hopefully, is that up? So this is on our website. This is an online card sort exercise to help reorganize our database. That's on our website from the front page. There's a link to that, and then as well, we've just been recruiting people for a 1 hour recorded user test. So we do that all the time. So part of improving statistical literacy is talking to people all the time, as many different audiences as you can organize, but go out and talk to them. And we're trying to do that as more and more. Okay, I don't know if there's any other questions.
No, actually, people thanked already you. Thanks for the answer. So yeah, someone has to, yeah, because we are a little long. I think now it's 5:15, so someone has to just
go for it.
finish. So I'm asking to the participant if they have just a last question or comment. We can stay connected for some other minutes, no problem. So of course, as I was saying, the presentation is already available, and then the recording also of the webinar will be made available on the dedicated website and also on the EMOS YouTube channel. Okay. So in any case, if you miss this or something, we can just look at it later. So it seems that we have no more comments or questions. So I think, would you like to add something, Tim? But I think it was very, interesting, and I think you touched everything that you wanted to.
Yeah, I tried to make a list of it.
Of course, in 1 hour, it's not that easy to cover all the things, and you're working on. So I would like to thank very much, Tim, for this interesting presentation. Of course, I would like to thank also our participants who join us as usual from many different places. So as I was saying, the presentation, the PDF part of the presentation is already available on the EMOS 2020 event website, and also the recording will be made available on the website, but it will be mainly on the EMOS YouTube channel. So in the meanwhile, I kindly ask you to check the inbox of your email account that you use for registering to the webinar, as you have already received the link to a short survey about today's webinar. We'd really appreciate your feedback to further improve our webinars. So the next webinar, the last one of the 2020 program, is scheduled on Thursday, 18th of June, when Marco Mira d'Ercole from the OECD will be presenting Beyond GDP, what have we accomplished so far. So I hope that you will join us, our participant will join us also for this last webinar of the 2020 EMOS Webinars program. So thank you again, Tim. Thank you, everybody, and I wish you a nice evening. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.